everybody. My name is William Sterling. I am a horror author, editor, screenwriter, and actor, and I am thrilled to be hosting this panel for Virtual Stokercon 2025. Today, we are here to pick the brains of the unsung heroes of horror lit, the champions of chatter, our podcasters. This panel, along with countless others, dedicates so much time, energy, blood, sweat, tears, and editing software to helping amplify our books to reach the broadest audiences possible. So I'm so excited to turn the tables for a day, to talk to these podcast hosts, and to celebrate them for an hour or two. We are going to get into why horror lit podcasts are such a thing right now. We're going to get into what these podcasters have learned about the horror community through over 1,000 interviews collectively. And we're going to get into what are some of the standout episodes for them. So buckle up, come along with me, and let's get into it. So guests, thank you all for being here today. Maybe let's start with Trevor. Trevor, can you introduce yourself and the podcast that you host? Tell us a little bit about it.
Sure, yeah. I'm Trevor Williamson. I host Slay House Presents. It's a show where I mostly just geek out about what is art and how does it fit into our lives. And I love hosting a lot of different, flavors in, I would say, more speculative fiction than just horror, although I do have a lot of horror guests on my show. But that's what I'm into. I just think that art is really interesting and has a unique texture for our lives. And so I'm constantly trying to kind of interrogate, what is this stuff? What are we doing with it? And how does it fit into the meaning making that we do as human beings?
Nice. And did you name drop the podcast?
I think I did. Yeah. Slay
Oh, okay.
House Presents.
All right. Slay House Presents. All right. Thank you for being here, Trevor. Anna, can you go next?
Sure. So first of all, very excited to be here. My name is Anna, obviously, and I run Anna Rose Reads, which you may know from Instagram, Twitter, Blue Sky, all the social media platforms. I read books, I review books, I post about books, and I talk about books. So you might know me from one of those various ventures. In the last year, I really started taking the podcasting thing seriously. I guess my little niche corner of the podcasting and horror genre is that I'm relatively young. I'm 26, and so I'm going back and reading what's current and reading some of the older horror that I might have missed, because I'm relatively new to the genre. So I like to think I can provide a little bit of a unique perspective, and of course, I'm a woman, so I love to leave a little woman's touch whenever I can, and talk about the feminine side of horror when it's possible. But yeah, you can find my podcast as Anna Rose Reads the podcast on all podcasting platforms and all social media, pretty much. I'm everywhere.
Yeah, amazing. And then next up, can we get Rob?
Sure. Thanks for inviting me to this. I'm very excited about it. So my name is Rob Olson, and my podcast is called The Arc Party. And so about me, I just thinking about this the other day. I've been podcasting about books for 14 years, which is a long time, not always with this podcast, with a different one, but right now the Arc Party is the one that I work on. And the kind of special way that I approach my podcast is I do pre-publication promotion of books. So I try to talk to an author as far ahead of the release of their book as possible, with the goal of encouraging pre-orders, encouraging people to, connect with their libraries and ask the libraries to get those books in stock there. And then obviously pushing people to do first day or first week purchasing of books so that the launch of a book is as successful as possible. But because I try to talk to authors so early, I'm often like the first person that is talking to an author about a new book. And so I try to be as conversational as possible so that it just kind of creates an environment of comfort where we can kind of explore and try to understand. You've just started talking about this book. You might not have it perfectly practiced yet, but hopefully me being a reader only, not a writer, and talking about the themes and things that it made me feel kind of inspires them to open up and really kind of dig into the meaning behind stuff and and why they wrote things the way they did. So that's really my approach. And I did get called the king of conversational interviews by Bob Pastorella. So really that's my thing, is like, I want you to feel like you're sitting in a room hanging out, talking to people.
Yeah, and Bob Pastorella, This Is Horror. There's so many other guests that I wanted to bring on here, and it was like, no, I have to draw a line somewhere. I'm going to do a whole round of shout outs at the end of this of like other podcasts that also deserve our love and attention. But last but not least for this panel, Neil, could you introduce yourself?
Yeah, hello. Thank you for letting me be here. So I'm Neil McRobert. I have a podcast called Talking Scared. Kind of is what it says on the logo. I speak to a different author each week, about their book, but also more broadly about their life, their approach to art, what really scares them, what inspires them. I don't really have a niche or niche, as you people would say. Other than I'm British and I have this accent and I have a cute dog which I use at any opportunity to sell the show. I always say that the show is designed around informed but informal conversation. So I take for granted that my audience are kind of au fait and a bit savvy with the genre. So I think that allows me to get beyond the normal promotional questions that a lot of these authors are asked to answer when they're doing more generic podcasts, none of which we are. But I think I do very much what the other guys do. I just hope I do it as well. I will say the one thing, I've branched out into movies and other stuff. I do a whole subsection now called Off Book, where I talk to people who create horror, but or horror adjacent things, but in other disciplines, so movies, podcasts, stuff like that. I just spoke to, for example, Eli Craig, who made the Clown in the Cornfield adaptation, and that's a nice little new string to the bow. But mostly, it will always be a literary horror podcast.
Yeah, I'm so excited about that interview because I just read Clown in a Cornfield for the first time to get ready for the movie, and I will not listen to that interview until I've seen the movie, but I need it.
Yeah.
All
Can we
right,
just
so
pause for a moment and just appreciate Clown in a Cornfield? Because that book is so good.
keep going, keep on the praise.
No, I read it and it was electrifying. I was like, I didn't know that YA could like go here now, because like when I was growing up, it was like YA was always just like Twilight and like paranormal romance, and it was like love triangles that aren't even really triangles because it's not a triangle if there's not like, the like
Mhm.
two guys trying to make out with the girl too. So it was like that was YA for me. And then I read this like hard R rated, super ultra violent, angry generational conflict of a book. And I was like, this is incredible. Is this where we are now? Like, chef's
And
kiss.
I love how the trilogy kind of shifts as well. It's like
Absolutely.
the metaphor just keeps going and keeps expanding. And I think that book, Adam Caesar's trilogy, was, I mean, it went down really well, but I feel like it unfairly fell in the shadow of Stephen Graham Jones's Indian Lake trilogy, because I think it
Mm.
does every bit as much for the slasher to revolutionize it and revitalize it. And if anything, it's even more appropriate for where we are now. And I keep banging the political drum for Clown in the Cornfield, and both Adam and Eli, who made the film, seem really reluctant to acknowledge that it's a book about America right now.
Hmm.
But I think it's incredible.
Yes, you're 100% on the money with all of that.
I love how we can't help ourselves. We mentioned one book's name, and here we go. Um, but I wanna dive into kind of the prepared questions here, and I want to start with Rob with that comment that you've been doing this for 14 years. One thing I wanted to dig into today with all of you here is just why are podcasts becoming such a prevalent method of discussing these books, analyzing these books, deep diving into them with the authors? Why is podcasting having such a movement right now? So, Rob, 14 years, you've probably seen this kind of like building and snowballing. What you got for us?
Man, when I started podcasting, like podcasting wasn't really a thing. Like people it was very new, and it was very nascent, and no one really knew what was going on. But so I'll start by answering kind of the main question. I think that one of the things from a perspective of publishers and authors that's attractive about podcasts is it's free. Like, you don't have to pay someone to go somewhere. You don't have to, it's easy to get to. They're ubiquitous. There's tons of them. So from that promotional perspective, open season. But I think that the draw from the listener side, from the maybe the fan side of things, is that it's just like a wide open format. So you don't have these canned, like, New York Times book review quick questions and brief answers. You don't have a 5-minute NPR interview. What you have is like an open opportunity to just start somewhere and follow it. So it's open, it's kind of unregulated, and really, like, instead of like saying we need the content to be this, you do a thing and then you're like, this is great because the content became this. So there's really no barriers to having a great in-depth conversation that, even though you might have planned your questions, you didn't necessarily expect that's exactly what was going to happen. So I think that there's the draw from the free, ubiquitous, everybody has something going on kind of thing. But really, the conversations have an opportunity to exist in a way on a podcast that never would happen in a traditional media format.
Yeah. Anna, you want to keep this going? Anything to
Yeah,
add? Anything to?
Yeah, sure thing. So I know for me, I mean, it's no secret. I listen to all of you guys' podcasts. I'm a big fan of all of you guys. And so I was somebody who was a fan first and a listener first, then, was like, oh, maybe I can give this a try. The appeal of podcasting about horror books for me was one, obviously the accessibility. We've talked about, it's free, it's accessible, you can pick it up, and I mean, I have a decent commute every day, so that's one side of it. But the other side of it is like Rob said, it's a conversation that you have the space to kind of explore and move it. Sometimes other venues limit, right? But the thing for me that kind of killed me and what got me into the game was is I wanted to be part of the conversation. Like I would be listening to Neil or Trevor have a conversation, be like, "Damn it, I have a point I want to make about that too," you know? And I think whenever you podcast or you foster these conversations in a way that opens the door for readers like this, it makes them feel included. And that's really, really special to be a reader and feel like, hey, I can be part of this conversation too. And not to say that everybody has to have a podcast to be part of the conversation, but even on social media, being able to say, hey, I listened to this episode. This is what I thought about this. And going from there. And, I think that we've all tried to foster communities outside of just the podcast. Like Neil, I know that you have your Patreon, like where you have, like a Discord and stuff where other people talk about things. So like it's a sense of community as well. I think it's a really accessible piece of community and just engages you a little bit further into the genre beyond the page. Reading and writing are sometimes can be very solitary things. But I think that in this movement to do podcasting the way that we have, we're trying to bridge that gap and not make it so solitary. And that's a really nice thing.
I think you hit so much like exactly right. And you use the word community, Anna, which I think is really important to what it is that I think like listeners are drawn into. I continue to wonder like what is I don't know. I'm gonna get real cerebral because I always do this, but like really what is the work that we do? And I know that there's work that we do for ourselves, but I think that we also have to take into account the work that we're doing, kind of as a surrogate for whoever it is that is listening. I'm a professor by trade. Like that is what I do in my daytime work. And I'm constantly thinking about what is it that my students are getting out of this conversation that we're having about, a literature that I assign to them. And so I think a little bit like the podcasting has become a space where readers who are hungry for that conversation, who are hungry for some kind of community that they can feel connected to and do something with the stuff that they read that is beyond just the, kind of factor of entertainment. I feel like we're in a crisis of critical thinking, at least in this country, and a crisis of literacy too. And I see podcasting as one particular venue where we're kind of opening up this space to be a bit more critical about things. Not every podcaster is doing that, I will say. I think that what's great about this table is that we seem to all understand the work. We all seem to understand the importance of really dialoguing with the text. And I think that the success of everybody at this table is at least in part because of that, because of the willingness to go and do the homework and pose the harder questions, or to really dig and root around to find the kind of novelty in the conversation that then we can present and say, and this is what the book is about, and this is what we've all been thinking about, and this is how it applies outside of just the text itself. So, at least for me, I think that's one of the reasons why podcasting continues to grow more and more important. We can probably have a conversation about like the pandemic and what that really did to our feeling of isolation and how that contributes to our yearning for a community, even a virtual community. But it seems to me like that's what's happening in this moment. And I'm sure Neil has some additional ideas on that too.
Well, I mean, I do, and that's a very profound thing you said. I mean, the first thing I would say is that podcasting gives someone with a face like me a job that TV would not. Because I've been watching myself whilst you speak, and I have such resting bitch face, and I never film video, and I had no idea. But my God, I scowl. But
Go
more
grab a friendo
seriously,
mask and
more seriously, I mean, I agree with everything, right? But community is the main thing. And one of the questions you're going to ask in a bit, I will talk more about community and hierarchies of fans and creators in this discipline, which I think is interesting and quite specific to horror. But we'll get to that later. My main 2 points, as for why podcasting is really booming in the book space. Maybe it's 1 point. I don't know. That conversation I did with Eli Craig. Sorry, my dog's going nuts. If you can hear him, I apologize. That conversation with Eli Craig, it was part of the whole Clown in the Cornfield press junket, and it was about a film. And I'm new to the film world. I don't really know how to navigate those waters. And at the end of the conversation, I asked him loads of stuff about this, that, like I do every week with books. At the end of the show, I remember he said this thing that really struck me. He said, this was in a really deep conversation about a film like Clown in the Cornfield. And that's a strange thing to say because that implies your film isn't sort of worthy of deeper conversation. And I don't think an author would ever say that about their book. So I think there is something about books in particular. I think people who read have a good attention span. People who read generally, you like to think, have better critical thinking skills. So I think the format, as much as like the format allows what Rob was saying, all this circuitous, meandering happenstance, which is wonderful. I think the format also rewards the type of person who engages with that format specifically. A reader will enjoy a podcast because of the nature of what a podcast is. The other thing is that I think this may be the same point, I don't know. But today, when we're recording this, Threads is aflame with people trying to cancel Stephen King. And it started with a joke he made about the whole JD Vance Haitian nonsense, right? I'm not getting into it. It's palpable bullshit that this is an issue, right? Forget it. But it's now morphed into my least favorite social media post, which is Stephen King wrote a child orgy, therefore I will never read anything he writes. It makes my blood boil. And it puts me in mind of when I did my 2-part deep dive into Stephen King's It, the book which contains the titular scene in question. The scene, not titular, but the scene in question. Myself and Nat Kattin, Ali Melanyenko, talked for like half an hour about the permutations of that scene. You can't do that in pretty much any other format. Talk about a scene as problematic and thorny, and I personally think necessary and, rationalized. But you can't have that conversation in a 10-minute interview on, PBS or in a little Vox Pop thing. You can't do that. You're going to piss somebody off. You're going to get it wrong. You're going to say something you don't mean and not have a chance to retract. And I think podcasting, particularly what we do, because we talk to horror authors, we are inevitably going to stray into the more challenging end of the literary pool. You're going to be talking about things that are provocative and upsetting and sometimes unpopular, and you need the space to respect it, respect the listener's feelings, and respect the intention of the artist. And I don't think there is any medium anymore, including top line, you know, quality journalism that affords the space and time for that. I think it's just podcasting. And and that's why I feel a great responsibility when I do this show, not to be flippant. I like to try to be entertaining and funny as and when I can, as Stephen King said in his lovely review of my show. Interesting, occasionally amusing. But I try and be all those things, but I think you've got to respect the topics because they're often so challenging. So that's my answer for why podcasting works for books.
Yeah, it's about sincerity, right?
Mhm.
Anna,
Yeah.
help me out.
Yeah, I think, in particular with horror, you don't have a choice but to be vulnerable, and that being vulnerable is really, really hard for everybody and anybody, no matter what it is. And so I think when you pick up a horror novel and you read something and you're like, oh, I identify or I relate to that, how can you not want to have a conversation with how that person who wrote that book went through the same thing that you did in a very specific way? And how can you not want to foster a greater conversation about why we're all experiencing this? And
Yeah.
horror is the genre that doesn't shy away. It just doesn't. We've never glanced away. And much to like Neil's point about, the scene in It, yeah, I mean it's got some weird connotations and people have, ran with it in the wrong ways, but being able to have greater conversations around the context of that scene and breaking it down is really, really important. And I think not to get political, but the problem that we face right now, I think, is that we've all been really radicalized because we read a byline, we read a point, and then we pick a side, right? And I think much like we've all said about being critical and critical reading, like Trevor said, that's really, really important that we have deeper conversations because that's how you develop empathy. And so whenever you're able to foster these conversations, you're able to maybe be part of a side or maybe understand a side a little bit different. And I think it just fosters humanity. It's such a greater thing and it goes back to community and all that stuff. But with horror in particular, it's in your face. We're talking about it. We're harboring really, really sincere, earnest conversations about topics that aren't really easy to talk about sometimes. Trauma, abuse, violence, the feelings that we all foster that normally stay in the dark, we're bringing to the light. So I think that's why, in particular, horror podcasting is doing so well. And you're, like Neil said, you're giving space to the things that we used to not talk about.
So, and kind of to that point, I think that one of the things that I've experienced talking to authors is that when something they wrote is misunderstood, it's an opportunity, first of all, to, kind of put context to why that exists in the book, but also um, from maybe the writer's perspective, understanding why people might think that way. So it almost feels like a two-way conversation. So when I talked to Eric LaRocca about At Dark I Become Loathsome, we talked through like a lot of that book is about how we do awful things when awful things happen to us, but it doesn't make us awful people. And but the existence of those awful things in the book is causing controversy, but having an open conversation about why it needs to exist and why, like you guys have been saying, that it's important for us to explore that and understand it. That's kind of the magic of what we do. So yeah, like just being able to go into why and understand how this is important. And it's not going to be something that's poignant or personal for everybody, the things that are in that book, but someone might really benefit from seeing that or reading it. And that's really valuable.
Yeah, I'll jump in here and kind of throw the second question that I had planned out because it feels like we're knocking on its door already, and this will just kind of open us up to like round out this conversation. But I was going to ask you all, you all have done hundreds, probably thousands of interviews collectively with the horror creative sphere, whether that's authors or directors. Or we've all kind of gone all over the place here. Is there something you have learned about this community holistically that maybe at the beginning you were like, yeah, no, I know horror authors because I know one or two and I know they're kind of this way. But when you get such a large sample size of interviews and you have been at the center of all of those conversations, are there any trends? Is there any kind of bigger picture that y'all have started picking up on here, that you could kind of speak to about what horror and what horror people are? I didn't land that question right, but maybe you kind of get where I'm going. Um, let's start with Trevor. You haven't had the mic for a second.
Sure. I was actually going to pitch it over to Neil because I feel I don't know. My perspective is a little bit weird because I do host a lot of horror writers, but I also host a lot of writers from other spheres too. Like just recently, I've had a couple of romance authors come on the show. I've had some science fiction writers. I'm planning out my summer, which is going to include some fantasy and science fiction as well. But I think one of the things that is kind of surprising is when I do conclude an interview with some of these science fiction or some of these fantasy or romance writers, that they're a little taken aback by the sincerity, by my like authentic interest in what it is that they're trying to do and trying to say. And I know that's just like that's how I feel about books. I just love story, and I feel like the more story I get, the more I can person better. I am on the spectrum, and that colors so much of how I feel about like what am I supposed to do in these situations. And I think books really arm me with some of that, like how to practice, real radical empathy, like we were talking about. But I find that horror writers are so much more comfortable with that empathy and so much more comfortable with that sincerity. And I think it's because the horror community itself is like maybe constantly practicing empathy. Like they're constantly having to put ourselves into the most extreme of circumstances and the most extreme of perspectives and like come back to this catharsis at the end of that road. And so like maybe that's a reason why I think the horror community itself has such a reputation of being a very kind community, a very supportive community, a very outspoken community. Whereas I think that outspokenness in other genres ends up being sometimes more critical, sometimes a lot less forgiving. And I'm not sure what it is about those other communities that ends up that way, but I've learned that horror writers and really most writers I think are really really empathetic, but their communities are not necessarily as empathetic as their work ultimately is. So again, I don't know if I have like a pat cool clean answer for this, but it is something that I continue to look at and kind of draw from. What are we practicing in these various communities, and why does it seem like other readers are not practicing the same empathy as in horror? I'm not sure.
Trevor, you speak better about this genre than anyone I've ever heard. That was lovely. Um, I agree. I mean, the empathy thing is paramount, and it's almost a bit of a cliche now that horror people are lovely people. And I often, I've got so in the habit of saying maybe we all get our demons out on the page, that maybe that's a bit pat and a bit trite. I don't know. There seems to be some truth to it because you could say the same about metal fans, right? An art form which is all about externalizing aggression leaves the internal very calm and peaceful and placid. I would, me and my wife argue a lot. My wife has no conception of why I like this stuff at all. She thinks we've all got deep-seated unresolved trauma. Um, and I say to her a lot, I say to her a lot that I do not think there is a higher ratio of sort of mental ill health in horror. What I think there is a much higher ratio of cognizance of our own state of mind and the state of mind of our peers. I think we're much more aware of the darkness within than others and more happy to talk about it, you know. So that's one thing I would say. I don't think we're more ill. I just think we're more honest. But the other thing that's a bit more, I suppose, commercially minded that I just find so heartening about this community is that it's an almost entirely flat hierarchy. So take King out of this, right? King is off over there on his throne doing his thing. He's like a godhead, right? Joe Hill, who is like, I would argue, the next level down, you know, familial link aside, I would say Joe Hill is the next sort of unreachable daddy of the genre. Joe Hill is friends with like three people that I interviewed this week, like, and they go for drinks, right? And I'm on social media a lot because I'm a writer, so of course I'm on social media. It's better than writing, or it's easier than writing. And all I see is Chuck Wendig speaking to some like breakthrough writer on their debut, or you know, once you get below King, who is a very generous soul, but everyone else, they're all in it together. And all right, that guy or that woman may sell, you know, 100,000 copies of their latest book, and this newbie author may be really happy to sell 1,000 copies of his self-published thing on Amazon. But there's no sense of snobbery or caste system within horror that I can discern anyway, and certainly not in the way that people have treated me. Like the most huge name authors have been every bit as courteous and weirdly grateful to come on Talking Scared as somebody breaking through. And I think that is just charming. And I don't think the impression I get is that is not the same in other genres necessarily, where it feels much more like you are part of the conclave or you aren't, you know. But I don't want to speak to that. I don't know, but I get that sense.
I prepared a thing to talk about this because I was very excited about this because I thought, because obviously my first thought was like, oh, I'm going to talk about empathy and that's what everybody's going to say. And so like, I didn't want to just repeat the things that other people were saying but it's very true and it's very at the front, right? So I kind of tried to dig down into like, what does that mean? And so what I kind of have been discovering over the years that I've been, you know, even more immersed in horror, and this is not like tried and true, this isn't like, but this is kind of the idea that has been forming in my head, is that people come to horror either as writers or readers kind of for like a few different reasons. Maybe they're exploring fear, they're exploring trauma, or they're preparing. And so like if they're exploring fear, Stephen Graham Jones, I talked to him when The Least of My Scars originally came out, and it was all about him having this fear and writing it out to kind of understand it better. But as a reader, if you're afraid of something and you read about it, you can experience that safely because you can put the book down whenever you want to. So exploring fear and horror from an author's perspective might be a way to exercise it or understand it. From a reader's perspective, it's a safe way to do it. More so than movies, because unless you're pausing a movie, you know, you don't have that safety net of being able to put it down when you want to. Exploring trauma. So like, we've all got trauma, as Neil said, and I didn't want to interrupt, but you're exactly right. We're just more maybe aware or vocal about our trauma, but we all got it. So, but like as a writer, I think it's obvious that like if you're writing something horrible that's based on trauma you've had, maybe you're working through it or you're trying to understand it, or maybe you just can't stop thinking about it. But so like Coup de Grace by Sophia Ajram is probably one of the most perfect books I've read in a long time. And that's really analyzing really hard things like depression and suicidal ideation and stuff like that. And so I think that's part of it. But from a reader's perspective, if you're reading about these things, it's possible that you feel less alone. Like if you see it somewhere else, I'm not the only one that feels this. And I think that that's a very big thing. So I think that that's another reason that people are drawn to. That's another thing that happens in the community. But then preparing, I think, is fun because like, like you, some people might just want to read or look at these horrifying situations just so they can understand it better. Like, I watch these home invasion movies because like maybe maybe that's something I'm scared of, and like now I've seen what works and doesn't work, and I can be more prepared for it. So I think that those three things are pretty common themes in why people either write or read horror, or why they're drawn to these types of stories. It's like, am I exploring my fear? Am I looking at my trauma, or am I preparing myself? Because I don't think anybody would disagree with me. The people who have read hundreds and hundreds of horror books or watched horror films are probably better prepared for when that crazy situation happens, to at least having a better idea of what to do. So,
Well, look at the pandemic. I mean, we'd all read The Stand, right? We'd all read that
well,
story,
I haven't.
you know. Oh, okay. Right. Well, well done for still being here. Um, but yeah, no, it's anyway, that's one example though.
Yeah.
Yeah, like I know all sorts of things through horror books that may keep me alive one day.
There's a dismantling that happens too. Like just I don't know, just like metaphorically when we talk about horror and think about horror. And I think these writers are doing that same work because like I couldn't get it out of the book if it weren't there on some textual level, right? So there's like an examination of our circumstances and trying to break down like how did we get here? What are we doing to ourselves, to each other? So it feels like there's a lot of metaphorical work that's being done on all of these fronts that you're talking about, Rob.
Mhm.
I definitely agree with that as well. And I think as somebody who came into the genre like a little bit, later in life, like I was not a tried and true horror fan as a younger person. Once I was in the community, I think that the earnesty and the willingness to go there by everybody is kind of what surprised me the most. And yeah, we can talk about the empathy and the kindness and all those things. And it's all of the things that we've said. And so I don't want to keep repeating them, but I think also it's beyond that, right? Like these authors that at least for me that I've spoken to and like each of you all on this panel have done something that has helped me or like we're not afraid to share a kind word or to promote or to help each other out. Like it's probably one of the least competitive atmospheres that I've been in. And I think, I don't know if it's because we're so in touch, like Neil said, like we're aware of our trauma, like we still have it, but I don't know if it's because we're so self-aware that that need to seem better or seem whatever is kind of lost in the shuffle. But whether you're a podcaster, a writer, a reviewer, an author, everybody kind of comes to the table with the same thing. It doesn't feel like anybody's, like Neil said, there's no hierarchy really. It's a pretty even playing field. And I'm always incredibly touched whenever I have people helping me. Like, there has not been a time that I've gotten off an interview that an author doesn't stick around for 5 minutes and like does like a check-in. You know what I mean? Like, I don't know. I don't interview outside of horror. This is all I do. So I don't know how this speaks for other genres, but to me, that's just like the most insane thing. Like, just that human level of connection that we're all here level and playing with is so important, and it makes you just feel valued and it's fuel to keep going. Like, you don't want to keep doing this if you feel like what you're saying is falling on deaf ears, but it's not. Like I don't I mean, my podcast is and my platform is relatively small compared to some of you guys, but each of y'all on this panel has still made me feel really special about what I'm doing. And that's really, really cool to be able to say that. I don't know that a lot of other people in other genres or communities can say that. I'll be honest.
Yeah, but
I,
you're going to be the future, Anna. You'll be bigger. You're going to rule the
no,
world.
a
I can tell
hundred
already.
percent, a
Oh,
hundred
no, no,
percent,
no.
Neil.
I keep
No,
telling people this.
it's like it's the truth though, Anna. And I think you said something that I think is really interesting, which is this idea of like competition. And I think that there is so much of the world that treats what we're all supposed to be doing, like professionally, like it is competition. We're always fighting for space over somebody else. I don't feel that way in podcasting though. Maybe I'm singular, maybe everybody else has just as like jealous as shit. I don't know. But it seems to me like every new voice that joins in at this table contributes something completely different, a whole different dynamic that is powered by your personality. So I listen to an episode that Rob produces, or that Neil produces, or that you produce, Anna, and I get something completely different out of it. Just like whenever William comes on and does, or when he was doing his show, Killer Mediums. I listened to every episode of that show because these different perspectives, I think, flesh out like so much of the texture that horror and that literature and that art can bring into our lives. So I don't know. It's like, thanks for fucking including me on this panel, guys. I love the discussion that you all bring to the table. I love the perspectives that you have about this art. And I love that we're so able to just grab from one another as we're all kind of simultaneously talking to the same people sometimes and walk away with this whole separate kind of like multi-dimensional understanding of these texts and what they contribute to us.
I'm glad we are all being so supportive and lovey-dovey right now because the last question on here is just going to be you fighting each other. One podcaster is going to walk out of this, and the other three we're gonna Hunger Games you to oblivion. But no, so I've got one more like real question, and then we'll kind of end on a rapid fire, spit some things out, sort of a question. But the one more real question that I would like each of you to dive into. I am not going to ask you who your favorite interview was because that is cliche and cruel. But I will ask you to think through your back catalogs for a second. And for anybody that is meeting you on this panel for the first time, hearing about your show, hearing your voice and your worldviews, and they're like, man, I want more of that. Can you isolate one episode that you have done in the past that maybe that author did an amazing job of giving some really cool answers? Maybe that text was just chef's kiss. Maybe it stood out to you for just whatever other reason. But is there one episode that each of you could highlight for a new listener to backtrack and kind of learn more? Rob, you want to start?
Yeah. So I mentioned earlier that Bob Passarella from This Is Horror had called me the king of conversational interviews, and I'd never heard that before he said that. And I was like, oh man, now I guess I have to really be conversational in my interviews because that's what the impression of me is. So that kind of blows up into kind of a really big, very meta version of itself when I went to Josh Malerman's house for a weekend and got like 5 hours of audio of us like drinking together and recording conversations about anything. And that ended up being like a 4 episode series of like the most version of that possible. But that's not what I'm mentioning, but it's kind of like a subtle plug that it's there. From that, I talked to Chris Panettiere, and when I was talking to Chris Panettiere, he was like, this was like my favorite conversation of yours was when you were hanging out with Josh, because like you're hearing the nature in the background, and I felt like I was sitting around the table talking to friends, and that was very, very nice to hear that it was such a good experience for him. But then that conversation turned into such a wonderful conversational thing where really the first 40 minutes we talked about punching Nazis, which I know Neil would appreciate. And probably I'm not going to say the others won't, but yeah, so that was a great conversation, but that's not the episode I'm going to talk about either, because I feel like one of the best conversations I've had since I started doing this podcast was very recently when I talked to Todd Kiesling about the Sundowners dance, and thinking about really fulfilling conversations where it touches on the things that we've been talking about, where I got so vulnerable. I talked about my cancer. We talked about, loss and all of these things and getting older and not feeling in control. And Todd got very, very vulnerable about, him and his wife having a cancer scare and how he basically had to imagine a future without his wife. And like, that's kind of part of how this story came about. That I think is one of the best examples of the type of conversation that I do my best to have on the podcast, is just, where is this book coming from? Where does it take me as a reader? And how can we kind of like use it to feel close to each other or better about a thing inside of ourselves? So talking to Todd about the Sundowners dance was such a great experience, that I would say that that's the one episode, the little plug to the Chris Panettiere one and the Josh Malerman ones as well.
You loopholing son of a bitch. No, good
I
job,
was
though. Good job.
I built a narrative to get to the main point, and I think that that's not a loophole.
We're all storytellers here. Um, who wants to jump in next?
I'll go. Because I'm also going to mention two episodes that aren't my answer. No, basically, I mean, for a start, I interviewed King. It's a massive deal, but it's a boring answer because, right, never mind. Um, I'm glad that Rob mentioned Malaman because I've spoken to Josh Malaman, I think, more than any other guest, but not for a while. And I've had a terrible year. And I think there's a correlation that I've not spoken to Josh Malaman recently enough because Josh Malaman is a rare human being who makes everyone around him happier. And every time I speak to him, I personally leave the conversation feeling creatively awakened. Um, he's like a force of nature that just doesn't understand that things may not turn out well. And that's a great person to have in your life. So Josh Malaman is it's become a bit of a running joke on the podcast that I consider him a good friend of mine. I've never been in his presence. He probably thinks I'm a stalker. But anyway, I'm happy with that. The other one, Mike Flanagan came on and talked to me about his hopes for the Dark Tower, and it's the only time on the podcast I've been close to tears because we bonded over our shared love of Oi the Brave, the Billy Bumbler, and I came very close to tears. So that was a big one for me. But my answer is a more obscure deep dive, sort of deep cut. I spoke to a writer who is horror adjacent, very horror adjacent. She's a writer called Zakiya Dalila Harris, and she wrote a novel called The Other Black Girl, which I strongly recommend everyone read. It's kind of a Black Mirror-ish sort of workplace thriller with a speculative edge, kind of like Rosemary's Baby in a publishing house. It's great. But the thing about the conversation was, I am perhaps too aware of my cis white maledom. It's a kind of thing that is always in my mind. I filter every question I ask through it, thinking, oh God, how does this sound? Because I'm really, really reluctant to ask somebody who is from a minority group of any kind to educate me and my listeners on their identity. That, it's that that shit is like old and happens far too often. The trouble is, when you're reading and talking about a book which is strongly predicated upon something from that um, part of someone's life experience, it's very difficult not to make the conversation all about that one aspect of someone's life. And it's a tightrope that I tiptoe along nervously. And when I spoke to Zakiya, her book is all about microaggressions in the workplace. It's all about the niche details, or at least niche to me from the outside, of Black millennial female urban life. Talking about the coding of hair, for example, things that I just had. I mean, I live in a tiny village in the north of England. There's like three black people in my village. I mean, I have no exposure to the kind of characters Zakiya was writing about. And she was so generous and so, I won't say patient because I don't think I tried her patience, but she got that I was coming from a good place. She was so funny, so charming, so eager to talk and eager to talk about the fact that I didn't know these things that she was writing about. And I think that conversation, quite aside from being a joy and a wonderful book, it made me a better interviewer because she was so generous. It allowed me to really think about how I was framing the questions. And I think I got better at talking to people who weren't white cis men as a byproduct. So that's the one I picked. If you ask me tomorrow, I'd put the whole different three. Like Paula Ash came on and talked about the most heinous stories imaginable, and is just a delightful person. Talk about necrophilia with Paula Ash, incest necrophilia with Paula Ash, and she's just laughing her head off and like was so lovely. But I'm gonna say Zakiya because she made me better at what I do, and that was a really long-winded answer to what was supposed to be a perfunctory question. I apologize.
We love long-winded answers. Um, Trevor and Anna, who wants to follow that?
Trevor can go. He let me go on another answer, so he's got to go first now.
Killing me, Anna. You're killing me. This is the hardest question that you asked because I genuinely just don't know like where to start. I don't ever really think of my episodes as like a showcase of me. I try my hardest to showcase the book and the author that I'm with. And I definitely talk about myself. If you want to to know me, it's all over, scattered all through the show. But I think just like literally any episode, just in the recent set of episodes that I've had Paulette Kennedy, Colin Armstrong, Nat Cassidy, I Jung, S.A. Barnes, Krista Carmen, Casey Jones, Erica T. Worth, Amal El Motar, which was a blast of a conversation. I think though, for me, when I reflect back on like what are some of the conversations that I think I continue to come back to, there are two in mind that I feel had probably the most direct impact on me personally, just as an individual. And that's a conversation that I had with Katrina Monroe when her most recent book came out, Through the Midnight Door, a book that quite literally saved my life last year. I've talked about that with some other writers. I talked about that with Anna on my show. But quite seriously, one of the most influential books I've ever read and just like really sat with me in a critical moment of my life. And then conversations with Laura Senf, who continues to just grace me with her presence and is so game to go along with a line of questioning that I don't think she ever really does in her own time. But she always shows up earnest and honest and open and just gives herself over to the ride. And I don't think I ever walk away from a conversation with Laura Senf without having just bawled my eyes out at some point in our conversation. And I think it's because she's just such a wonderful person and a wonderful writer. And I'm blessed to have had the opportunity to converse with her. I think that shows up in the episodes that we have.
I would go to war for the Clackety, by the way.
My first tattoo is gonna be bird from the Clackety. And
Mm.
like I'm so set on it. I've already asked Alfredo Casares to draw the bird for me. Like I it is like foundational reading.
Yeah, yeah, I agree.
All right. Well, I guess I'll bring it all to a close. So once again, to nobody's surprise, there's more than one answer to this, but I'll try and keep it short. I think if somebody were to come to my podcast and be like, "Hey, what's this about?" My interviews with like Clay McLeod Chapman, Nat Cassidy, Rachel Harrison, like those are like very much on brand for like the kind of episode that you'll see consistently for me. In particular, I mean, anytime I get to talk to like Liz Karen or Rachel Harrison, and this is not kissing ass about Punk Goes Horror, but that was a genuinely very fun episode for me. I love being able to connect with, female authors because I just feel like there's something that I really get out of those conversations. It's just really like it really fulfills me to have those kind of conversations. And so when I say this, my interview that I did with Kim C, she does the Year of the Underrated Stephen King podcast. The sheer amount of joy that I experienced in that conversation, I walked away and my cheeks were hurting. I mean, like I was smiling so much. There's just something really special about finding somebody who, I mean, we don't think exactly the same, but some of our opinions fall in line. And even the ones that don't, she's just like opened my eyes to the way that she reads Stephen King, especially as a woman, like how you consume his work. It was such like an amazing conversation. We laughed, we got teary-eyed. We went through the whole thing. So my episode with her is really special to me. It's one that I walked out of being like, damn, that was really good. That was like real, that was important to me. That felt important to her. Like that was something that I felt like came through in that episode. So if somebody's looking for that, I mean, that episode is there. But whenever it comes to like my normal conversations about up and coming books or books that have just released, I'd say, my conversations with Clay, I go back and I still laugh my ass off when I go back and listen to those. I mean, he's all over the place and you have to keep him on task, but it's just so fun. And he's such a big cheerleader of the genre too. You can't help but love those conversations.
Well,
You
you
know
all
my
cheated
theory that Clay's got
spectacularly.
people locked in his basement because no one's that nice.
No, I could see it, you know. I mean, he's got that laugh. He could
Mm.
pull off that really evil maniacal laugh. So I wouldn't be
Imagine him coming
surprised.
downstairs in like a pig mask, you know what I mean? An
Yeah.
apron. You can imagine it. Yeah.
Well, and no one is more reluctant to talk about their own writing than
Oh
Clay.
yeah.
Like you
Mm.
have to just reach in and pull it out of him because he'll spend an
Yeah.
hour and a half talking about anything else.
Absolutely.
Well, you all cheated spectacularly on that question, as I kind of assumed you would. Um, and let's okay, so my fourth and final question, I'm gonna kind of open it up as a free for all, just spitball answers as they pop into your head because there's just so much here. But what I'm hoping to get to round things out, we've talked a lot about community, about how everybody supports each other. So let's do it. Let's support each other for a second. All the other horror podcasts that you love, if you could throw out a quick plug for them along with a 1 or 2 sentence pitch for the show. Example, two that I love, and I am kicking myself that I couldn't find a way to get them onto this podcast also. Jeff C. Carter hosts a show called We Bleed Orange and Black. It is talking to all sorts of spooky people, and his slant is that he keeps it very Halloween oriented. He ties most, if not all, of the episodes back to the greatest of holidays. And then Thomas Gloom with his show Into the Gloom. It's back now. We talk about informal conversational podcasts. His is the most informal and just so much fun every time he hits record with a guest. So I'm not gonna intentionally hand the mic to any of you, but just start shouting some out. What have we got? Who else?
I'm
I'm gonna
I'm
shout.
going because I
Oh,
don't want anybody to steal
Whoa,
mine. I'm
whoa.
going
okay.
first.
All
Okay.
right.
Books in the freezer. Stephanie is the light of my life and I love her so much. She is incredibly funny and I love the way that she talks about media on her podcast. It's not limited to just books. It's TV shows, it's movies, it's podcasts, it's playlists on Spotify, it's music. It's like so well-rounded that if you have like an idea of a topic around horror, she's going to talk about it. And then also Agatha Andrews does She Wore Black. That's a little bit more. Sorry, Trevor. I just saw you throw your hands
That was
up.
my one. That was it. Yeah.
Yeah,
I knew.
sorry.
Yeah.
I think that her stuff is focused more towards like the gothic in general. So sometimes it's gothic romance, sometimes it's some of the other genres. But she's just a huge proponent of reading critically, and I am all for that. Her conversations that she fosters around literature in its current state and reading beyond, which is on the page, is really important to me. So those are my big two ones that I shout out. And oh, and of course Kim C's podcast because she's sorry, Neil. Okay, I just told everybody.
Steal everybody.
Yeah, she's basically, her and I are on the same path with King and that we're going back and reading older stuff and, sharing our experiences with it. And so it's really cool to see somebody going through the same things that I am going through as well when I read him. And I'm going to shut up now before I steal anybody else's. Okay, bye.
Well, I'm going to jump in because just to reiterate about Kim C. I mean, yes, Books in the Freezer and She Wore Black. I knew they would be mentioned,
Yep.
because they're kind of foundational. And Stephanie got me on her show really early. She inspired me to make my show. She was the impetus. So, but everyone listens to those. If they listen to us, people know about those guys, right? Kim C, because it's King centric. The year of underrated Stephen King. It may be a little bit less known, and she really is just the most charming, enthusiastic, full of life. Sometimes I've heard people say, "Oh, she's too nice," but I don't care because she reads the book so beautifully. She's got a poetic kind of delivery. She's also like a teacher, so much like you, Trevor. She's got that beautiful way of just delivering eloquent. I'm saying, I'm going, you guys are good at this. This is why I'm no longer in academia because this is how I speak. But I'm gonna say too that I'm kind of subverting the question here because I'm not recommending shows that need my help. I'm going to recommend two very, very, very big shows, but because I think people will love them, and that's its own merit. So the first is a show I came to very recently, which is called Heart Starts Pounding. Does anyone know this? This is what gets me. She's got like 1 million Instagram followers and she's massive, but lots of people don't know the show. I'm big into real world mysteries, anything spooky, UFOs, cryptids, unsolved murders, stuff like that. Kaylin from Heart Starts Pounding, she does half hour little, easily digestible stories where she talks about these creepy things, but they're always quite niche. They're never it's not the Loch Ness Monster. It's some lake in the middle of, like, I don't know, Mongolia that you never heard of. And her grandfather actually helped catch a serial killer back in the day. So um, she's amazing and has become a real supporter of mine and has helped me out a lot. So that's Heart Starts Pounding. The other show is on a very similar vein. Again, it's not what we do. It's narrative retellings of mysteries. But it's great grit. This is great grist for the creative mill guys, and it's a show called Unexplained. It's a UK-based show run by a guy called Richard. It's been going for, like, I don't know, 8, 9, 10 years now. There's hundreds of episodes. He talks in this very strange monotone voice, which is not his real voice at all, because I know the dude now. But it has this wonderful lyrical sing-song element that kind of lulls you into a false sense of calm whilst he's talking about the most horrendous things. And I now write for that show. So this year I've been writing some of the episodes, but don't worry about that. Go back to the start before I ruined it, and listen to the good stuff. Unexplained, Richard McLean Smith. It will titivate your horror nerve endings.
Neil, too, really quick. The episode that you had with the host of Heart Start Pounding, right?
Mm-hmm.
Really
Yeah.
good. So I think that if people want to listen to your episode about that to kind of get an idea what that podcast is about, it was a very good episode.
Yeah, do that. Listen to me first. Yeah, yeah, and then go listen. Oh, actually, and also another one while I'm on the subject, because someone else came on the show. National Parks After Dark, another massive podcast that doesn't need my recommendation, but they came on my show to talk about it. They talk about dark stuff that happens in the American national parks, which is a particular obsession of mine. So, National Park After Dark. I will stop talking
I
now.
co-sign that one too. That one's a really good one. I love them. They're great.
I guess that I mean, Rob's probably got some proper uh, uh, recommendations for us, but I'm gonna say, like, you should be listening to Anna and Anna Rose Reads. I know that's kind of cheating because she's here on the panel with us, but, like, legitimately, what a fresh voice in
Mm.
this horror community. And I listen to every episode and I continue to, like, reflect on my own ability to do what I do because it's so effortless and you get so much out of your guests in a way that I think is just beautiful and delightful and heartwarming. So yeah, you should be you should be listening to Anna Rose Reads. I think she's gonna bury us all with
Mhm.
enough time.
I second that. It's a far nicer listen than us broken, jaded souls.
Y'all have to stop. I'm gonna cry or some shit on this, and I know other people are gonna be watching it because we're on camera. It's not just audio, and it's not gonna be a good look.
But she will bury us all. This is not, I'm not
Yeah.
saying this
Oh,
in a
yeah.
patronizing sort of false
No.
way. Like, if I'd been that good at 26, imagine where I'd be now. I'm
Yeah.
41 and broken. Do you know what I mean? And, like, God,
Okay,
I
but
hate
It's
you.
gonna. It's
to be fair, I could not do it without y'all because if it would not be for all of y'all's kindness in the early days, in the early aughts, and agreeing to talk to me whenever all of y'all have, then there's no way that I would have been here. So thank y'all very much for the kind words, but
yeah.
it really would not be possible without y'all's kindness. Like, y'all know that.
Well, I'll have to pile on to that and say that it'll be nice to say that. Oh, I knew her back when. So I'll enjoy that moment. Shame on everybody for not mentioning Clay's podcast, by the way. Fearmongers is fantastic, where he
yeah.
has multiple authors on and talks to them and then has them read from their books. It's fantastic, and his intros have kind of, like, been getting a little bit kind of weak recently, but, like, his intros are usually very theatrical, so that's great. I can't not talk about This Is Horror because I've plugged it several times. But, like, This Is Horror started just after I started my first podcast. And so we kind of, like, came up together, and they're north of 600 episodes and have just talked to everyone. And their approach is more to get to know the author in addition to, I just hit my microphone. I'm the only one. In addition to talking about the book, they actually talk about the person and they get to know them. So I think that's a little bit unique for that podcast. But I can't not mention Tanana Du's podcast, Life Writing, because of everything I've ever listened to in podcasting. The most perfect episode interview I've ever heard was when they talked to S.A. Cosby. There was something about Sean going on that show and talking about his books and talking about, everything that hit me in a way that I've never experienced before. And Tanana Reeve and her husband, Stephen Barnes, are just so engaging and interesting and obviously enthusiastic, but that show is you cannot miss. They get incredible guests in both books and in like film and everything and other stuff. But yeah, definitely be listening to the Tanana Reviews podcast for sure.
Awesome. Well, I'll go ahead and wrap it up here because we are right at the hour mark we were shooting for pretty much. Nice job, everybody. To everybody on the panel, thank you so much for dedicating your time to this discussion. It's so much fun hanging out with y'all in any way, shape, or form, but especially all four of you together. My heart's full. To everybody that is listening to this after the fact, I have no idea when they're dropping this, but I'm gonna venture a guess of June, probably while we're at Stokercon anyhow. If Stokercon hasn't happened yet, come on out to Stokercon. Come meet, hang out with us, say hey. If this is after Stokercon, I don't know what to do anymore. But you'll find us somewhere. We are out and about, and you can certainly find places to hear our voices. One last plugs for our own shows and our voices. Where can listeners find you if they want to come listen to those episodes that we name dropped earlier? Oh, Trevor, sorry. Moderator. I should moderate.
Yeah, you can find me over at Slay House Presents. It's not spelled how you think. It's SLEY House Presents. I'm at Slay House Presents on Instagram, Threads, and Blue Sky. I post what I post, but I always appreciate a follow.
All right, Anna.
Oh, I'm everywhere. In some variation of Anna.Rose_reads or Anna_Rose_reads. Podcast is Anna Rose Reads the Podcast on Spotify, Apple Podcasts, YouTube, Substack. Those are the main places. I also post what I post unapologetically. I'm kind of all over the place. I also review for Capes and Tights, so if you want to check them out, you can check out my reviews there. Sometimes I write for the lineup. Sometimes you can find my stuff there. I'm just really all over the place. It's really a chaotic throw at the wall, see what sticks approach that I've taken to all of this. So if you follow me one place, you'll probably catch all of my stuff on the others.
Neil.
So the show is Talking Scared everywhere. I'm on social media at Talk Scared Pod because I couldn't get Talking Scared because someone has it, and I hope nothing bad happens to them. But because of what I post on social media, if this is going live during Stokercon, there is a good chance I'm currently detained in a back room at JFK undergoing a cavity search. So please, could you crowdsource a lawyer? Thank you.
Robert Atone and I will coordinate the jailbreak. And Rob.
All right. My podcast is The Arc Party. I am at The Arc Party on, what is it? Blue Sky, Instagram, YouTube. I have a Substack as well. So that's pretty much where I'm at. And I'm so book focused that I'm not worried about, incarceration or anything. Although I do talk about punching Nazis sometimes, but we all should. So yeah, at The Arc Party, anywhere you'll find me.
Amazing. Thank you all one more time. I'll default to the old retired sign off. So everybody have a great rest of the day and stay spooky.
Thank you so much
Thank you
for
for-
doing
thank
this
you for
and having
this.
us.
Thank you.
Thanks so much.
Good.